of you on behalf of Avtar for yet another engaging and insightful session. My name is Harini Kumaravel and I'll be your host for the evening. So before we begin, a couple of hygiene checks to ensure a seamless virtual experience. Please close all the other applications on your computer and make sure to log out of your organization's VPN to conserve internet bandwidth. So there is a lot of pride in owning your identity. There is pride in not concealing your heart's desire. Bringing our own complete selves to work is a luxury. Pride Month is a reminder of all that, and it's a perfect time to comprehend the progress that we've made as companies in the realm of LGBTQ inclusion. But before we begin, we should understand why we as organizations should consider this diversity strand. Well, there is a clear business case for it. The yearly spending capacity of the LGBTQ consumers is about $5 trillion US, as per a study conducted in the 2018 by PricewaterhouseCoopers. And there is a 45% increase in innovation for companies with above average leadership diversity, according to a study by Boston Consulting Group. So the business case is very clear. The more the diversity, the more the gains, the more the belonging. So befittingly, our panel discussion is titled, What Will It Take the India Inc. to Fully Embrace the LGBTQ Individuals? So this addresses the different aspects of the LGBTQ inclusion, and we also aim to inspire and motivate many more organizations to embark and accelerate their inclusion journey. So let me quickly introduce the panelists one by one. So first up, we have Mr. Ramprasad Padmanabha, Vice President, Product Management, Publicis Sapient. Ramprasad is an expert at blending strategy, engineering, experience, and data capabilities to build and grow products at scale. He has worked with multiple organizations worldwide on their digital transformation journeys and currently leads the strategy and product management capabilities for Publicis Sapient. He also leads the product thought leadership and innovation globally for the same company and serves on the DEI Council with a mandate to hire and coach diverse talent. A warm welcome to you, Mr. Ramprasad. So moving on, secondly, we have Mr. Chandra Duraiswamy, Senior Director, Global Communications, LM Wind Power, a GE Renewable business, GE India. As a diversity champion of the LGBTQ plus community at NHRDN, he is the proud recipient of Avtar Diversity Champions Awards 2022. He is a senior director at GE India and has walked the talk in creating inclusive workspaces for the community. He has done a lot of initiatives like investing time in pitching business case for the LGBTQ community in India Inc., shared of living experiences to build empathy and creating awareness among employees and converting them into nurturing allies, mentoring people from the queer community and coaching them to be vocal, visible, and successful. And he has also co-founded Advisory Collective, an NGO that assists organizations to embark on their inclusion journey. A warm welcome to you, Mr. Chandrasekharan. So the next panelist we have is a very special person. We have Prerna Waghela, Assistant Manager at Mphasis. Prerna, the Assistant Manager, is an advocate for LGBTQ plus rights and an established development sector professional with over 11 years of experience. So prior to Mphasis, she has held positions in Amnesty International India, Swasti, and Pathfinder International. At Mphasis, Prerna drives DEI initiatives at the organization to contribute towards creating a culture of diversity and inclusion. Welcome, Prerna. So let me introduce our coordinator for the entire panel discussion, Amita. Amita, the principal strategist of LGBTQ practice, will be moderating this discussion. Amita has had over 23 years of experience in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. For the past 11 years, she has worked with Deloitte US offices, where she led their DEI efforts. She has successfully positioned Deloitte among the top 10 best companies for women in India, and she has had several years of experience leading and influencing all aspects of inclusion and HR policy as they relate to talent acquisition, retention, and advancement. She has had rich experiences in contributing to gender, disability, cultural, generational, sexual orientation, and holistic well-being. So, welcome, Amita ma'am, and the session is yours to take. So for the participants, please feel free to post any questions that you might have on the chat window. We will engage them as we go through the session. Over to you, Amita.
Thank you, Harini, for that fabulous introduction. Greatly appreciate it. Once again, a very warm welcome to not just the panelists, but everyone who's taken the time to participate and be here for the session. I assure you, with my limited interaction with the panelists that I've had already, it promises to be a very enriching, insightful session and a lot of takeaways for all of you. And like Harini said, I would recommend start posting your questions after the first 20 to 25 minutes into the session so that they don't get buried with other comments. And we'll be able to find your questions more easily in the chat window if you post them roughly around 25-30 minutes into the session. And I promise you I'll try to cover as many questions as possible. And the panelists are looking forward to addressing your questions as well. So with those few words from me, I want to jump straight into the conversation. The objective of this conversation is twofold. One is to understand from our panelists what their journeys have been, both as people who identify with the LGBTQ community and who identify as staunch allies of the community. One, to understand their journey, but two, what do they see as barriers for organizations to either embark on this journey or accelerate the journey? And they will share with us what, in their view, does good and helpful allyship look like? What does it look like? What should it look like? What will help and be supportive of the individuals who identify with the LGBTQ community? So with that, Chandra, let me pose my first question to you. Given that you do identify with the queer, you have a queer identity, what has your journey been like so far, both in the professional world as well as in your personal space? If you don't mind, we would love to hear what that has been for you.
Thank you, Amita. It's been an interesting journey for me, both in the closet and outside the closet. I will do my best to condense 35 years of my life in a few minutes. I stayed in the closet for 15 years of my professional career. So for those of you wondering what it feels like to be in a closet, I have an analogy to help you understand that better. During the first wave of COVID, we were all in lockdown mode for 9 to 12 weeks, depending on where you lived in India. We couldn't move out of our homes. We couldn't see our friends. We couldn't socialize. All of us felt miserable in our own homes. We felt depressed. We just wanted this to end. We couldn't be ourselves, so on and so forth. This is exactly how it feels in a closet. Imagine we only lived for 9 to 12 weeks. But for some people, they've lived for years together in the closet. For some people, they've lived their entire life, which means they're not able to completely live their authentic self. It is very, very painful. Living in the closet has profound effect on physical, emotional, and mental health of a person. Very fortunately, I had very understanding parents at home. So I was able to come out to them much earlier than I came out at the workplace. Very, very supportive. And all of that did not happen overnight. It took some time for them to be supportive, for them to be allies. It is a lifelong journey for them to understand, for them to know, okay, there's nothing wrong. This is all natural. This is all a part of how we are as humans, so on and so forth. So it took some years, but then they came around and they were very, very supportive. But then the workplace is an entirely different ballgame. Since the society abhors homosexuality, people from the community are constantly asked to question their identity. They're made to go through pangs of guilt, shame, and abomination. Nobody would even speak up at the workplace because they've already had families. A lot of them leave their families. A lot of them are also disowned by their families. So they've lost relationship. They've lost their own near and dear. There's so much of trauma associated. They don't want to drag this trauma into the workplace. They want to create a workplace where they can have peace for 9 to 10 hours every day. That was also a reason why I did not bring my real and authentic self in the workplace. Not just that, India had criminalized homosexuality until September 6, 2018. So if you came out as a homosexual prior to that, you could be put in jail for 10 years. All the hard work that I did in terms of getting my degrees, going overseas, educating myself, all of that would just go down the drain if I came out. At the workplace, I still heard people use abusive, discriminatory, and unparliamentary language against LGBT people. There were no out individuals for me to look up as role models or mentors at that point. And workplaces did not have ERGs where I can go and report, or where I can seek help or counseling, so on and so forth. That was those were some of the reasons why I decided to stay in the closet. The closet really felt comfortable. But that changed in 2016. My manager helped me open my closet door. So how did that happen? I had no idea my manager was from the queer community. He sent me his coming out story prior to the Pride month and said, hey, can you have this edited so that we can publish it on the website? I was so inspired reading his story and how supportive his manager was. And when I responded with the edited version of the story, I let him know that I am from the queer community, and I told him we're birds of same feather. During my one-on-one, he never asked me about my sexuality. But then he asked me, what is it that you can do to help 25,000 people working for me in India feel safe and welcomed? Because you feel safe and welcomed because I am there. And how can you be there for me? And that was a changing point, if I should say, in my life. And then I asked myself, when I find such a safe environment, if I can create that safe environment, not only can I come out, I can also roll out a red carpet to all the LGBT colleagues in the organization for them to feel safe and welcome. Didn't stop there. So I used his office. I went and knocked the doors of legal. And I said, hey, can we talk about starting an ERG in India? And they did not give a go ahead immediately because there was section 377 that was in place. But then I said, why don't I bring in a lawyer from the outside world to convince them that to treat your employees respectfully, give them the same opportunities as others, make them feel at home, is not violation of Article 377 in the in the IPC. So they came around, the legal team came around, HR came around, and immediately we were able to create an inclusive atmosphere in the next 6 to 10 months. In 2019, I was headhunted by another organization. I currently work for GE for a leadership role. And I was to be a part of the management team. During the last round of interview with the CEO, I told them about my orientation. I said I lived an open life and I'd like to work for an inclusive and welcoming organization. And I was so happy to join them. They welcomed me, part of the management team. You don't find very many people belonging to the management team from the LGBT community. So coming out can be very empowering. It can help people to create better version of themselves. And that's very true in my case. Like what Harini introduced me, I also created an NGO early on at the start of the pandemic to help organizations kickstart their LGBT inclusion journey. Today, I'm rallying for trans inclusion at corporate India. So far in the year, I've fundraised about 5 lakhs through my speaking assignments to ensure that our trans colleagues are also a part of our workplace. So in 2016, I relinquished my closet. As a result, my productivity has doubled. My contribution to the society and LGBT community has multiplied by many folds. All of this would not be possible without an inclusive, welcoming employer, a manager from the community, and allies that surround me.
Awesome, Chandra. Thank you for sharing that story of yours. I find it very inspiring. And you're so right. One individual can make such a huge, one individual's support, one individual's allyship can make such a huge difference. And allyship doesn't only come in the form of, from straight people. People who identify with the LGBT community are also allies. And so we should take a step back and reflect on how best we can support. And actually, to this point, I'll be coming back to all of you, 3 panelists, on your views on what does great allyship look like. So, but that in just a bit. I want to pull in Prerna right now. Prerna, you identify as a trans woman. What would you say are some of the key challenges you faced? And would you have any piece of advice for those who are at this point facing gender dysphoria, which means that they identify with the gender? You're on mute, Prerna.
Thank you for this opportunity, dear.
Sure.
So this is Prerna. I'm a proud trans woman. I work with Mphasis, and wishing everybody happy Pride Month. And what a discussion during this month. And for me, especially coming from trans community. So my experience is not so different than what we have heard. So luckily, I had my family support by me, with me, which is why I have been able to stand tall in my journey at workplaces and also in my journey in society. I was in the closet for a while, but that was very suffocating. This closet experience has been so traumatizing, which is why without realizing anything, I just got into my journey of transformation with the permission of the parents. And because I had the parents, the whole world I thought is with me. And that's how I began my journey, 20 years ago as trans woman. I come from the field of education. I worked in an education sector for about 7 years to teach literature to the students of grade 9th and 10th. But I was aware about the society, which is patriarchal, and society of non-acceptance towards the community. Now, this non-accepting attitude and perception, which is strongly holding these people back to embrace the diversity and the people of various sexual orientation, was aware of the fact and was prepared also that my journey is not going to be so easy, because I will have to come across such experiences, which is the outcome of the people with mindsets and perceptions. It all began, I would like to give an example, because I always wanted to continue my career in education sector because I master's in education from the University of Mumbai. but the place where I was for 8 years refused to give me the same position because of my expression, because of my identity. And that was the beginning of the experience that life is not so easy, ecosystem is not responsive, and now you have to really run pillar to post to ensure that your livelihood goes on. I never gave up. It went on and on. I thought if education sector door has closed, definitely another door opens. And that's the person I am. Rejection makes me stronger. I thought I'll develop my career in developing sector. And I chose to, get into this particular space. But here also, as we know, what kind of leaders we have around, what kind of managers we have around, with such a strong malicious belief and thought process. And definitely I was at times the victims to those perceptions and mindsets. As simple as that, during my onboarding, because all of us have our own experiences, personal experiences, could be negative, could be positive, and some experiences we do not want to recall and reconnect and build on that. But here, since there was a change in change in my name, because my testimonials documents are different, and here my identity is different, which was not matching. But having forced to respond to those personal questions that are not really so comfortable about your surgeries, about your transformations, about your name changing. I think ecosystem needs to be little sensitive, because kind of mindsets that the people have, it's very difficult to respond to those, because all of us have a reservations to unfold certain stories of your personal experiences, but there is no respect sometimes, I feel. Another example, like today, I feel so happier to have this particular opportunity to express and to talk about my journey, which could also be inspiring, and which could also be learning lessons for many of my community members and many of the allies who would like to stand by the community to support them. Now, with this exposure that I have, if I'm talking about my life experiences and my journey, imagine if you're not chosen to speak or make a presentation because of your identity and because of your orientation. Instead, somebody else doesn't deserve or doesn't even have a data clarity of a kind of a work that you have done, and still goes up on the stage and to talk about it. I mean, it is so dreadful and so demoralizing. But
Sure.
such
Yeah, sure. No, please finish your thought, and then I have a follow-up.
Yeah, such kind of experiences of letting you down, doubting your own self, and putting you to the space to space of conflict, whether you have done a correct thing of getting yourself transformed, or you would have just stayed to you would have stayed the way you wanted to stay, in closet. I mean, this is how you get into the self conflict for yourself. But for me, I have just been able to rise above such kind of experiences arising out of biases, mindsets, and perceptions that people have. Because for us, if getting stuck and not moving ahead with such experiences would take us nowhere. And that's kind of a person I am. And I hope I have this temperament and attitude that has been helping me to hold myself to fight against such malicious attitude of the managers or people or key influencers in the society. Okay, so
yeah,
that's
absolutely. Let me, this is amazing. Thank you, Prerna, for sharing so much. I'm going to come back to you and to Chandra about what does allyship look like, should look like, and what would have helped you folks. But just let me pull Ram Prasad into the conversation. Ram, you identify as a staunch ally and a supporter and a champion of all aspects of diversity and inclusion. Do share with us a little bit now from your organizations. Share with us when did your organization embark on this journey of inclusion, LGBTQ plus inclusion? And if you could call out the top 2-3 best practices, as it were, because that will help our listeners and audience today take away, in case in their organizations they have yet to embark on that journey. So what does that initial journey look like, and what did it look like in your organization?
Thanks, Amita, and very, very inspiring stories, both Chandra and Prerna. Really inspired to sit on this side and listen to you. So you talked about the organizational journey, Amita, and there is a personal element as well there. About 4 years back, I was speaking to my manager, and we were talking about at an India level, what should we do, and that's where I at least started getting becoming part of the DEI Council in India. And what we did was, as part of that, all the Publicis Sapient leaders, I think, about 10 of us or whatever, we all took this IDI assessment. Okay. And I'm sure some of you know this. IDI is assessment to measure your attitude towards, the entire DEI spectrum. And before that, if you had asked me, I would have said, I'm a strong ally, right? And then I got my scores and I was surprised. Hey, is that true? And then I was discussing my score with my assessor. She was helping me understand, why the score is what it is, and how that is the world over, right? And that's when I still remember when this IDI assessment score was being discussed, I was contrasting that with what is happening at my home. My elder daughter at that time, she was in 8th grade that time, 7th grade at that time. And she was building an app for transgenders to find employment. Okay, along with her friends, it was a summer project. They wanted to, build something, it was a more tech focused project, but they also wanted to take something, which is social, and their inspiration came from, the people they saw begging in the streets, right? So that's, and I thought the attitude with which she approaches the topic of transgenders is much more open and much more curious than I was, right? And which is what I exactly heard the IDI counselor telling me, that, hey, you should first be on the path of learning yourself, right? And understanding, what does even being an ally mean, right? Sometimes before this, I would have not asked a question if, say, someone identifies, and comes forward, has a discussion. I would think it would be impolite for me to engage in a discussion, right? But that IDI assessment, not just for me, but for all the leaders in Publicis Sapient, I think was kind of almost like a good beginning point for us to start the whole journey. And since then, we've done a lot of things. Amita, you just, just one simple question. But I think we have partnered with organizations like Mphasis, which works overall across India in the inclusion space. We have sponsored a lot of policy drafting and all of that with Mphasis. Internally, we have partnered with organizations like Periphery to, hire interns, even hire people from the community, because otherwise there is no specific way of, doing any LGBTQ hiring. Second is, we also re-looked at a lot of our policies, and we found that some of the policies which Publicis Sapient already had were really, really good. For example, HIV coverage is something we've been offering, and that has been one reason why we heard a lot of people say that, hey, you offer HIV coverage as a OPD, which we don't see, a lot of other companies offering, and that's why we like you, right? So we realized that we had a lot of good policies in place. Some policies we had to tweak, and I think the biggest one, and I think this is still a journey for us, is like, it is not enough if you have policies, if you hire people, but it's also about, how do you create that inclusive atmosphere which Chandra spoke about, right? And again, like, at least my experience so far has been like really, really positive in terms of, how we have landed some people. We kind of, we didn't do extensive sensitization or whatever, like, initially, like, speaking to Vishaka, who's our DI colleague in the company, and like, so should we, like, do an extensive sensitization for this particular team before landing this person? And we eventually decided that we will not do it. We'll like try to make it as normal as possible, but be super alert if there are any, red flags or amber flags or something. But like, it's been almost a year now, and happy to share that the progress has been really good in terms of not just the process and people, but what eventually happens when you kind of, get people from the community in the company, and how that goes, right? So it has to, like, it has to be same like for everyone, right? Like in terms of opportunities, career growth, and everything. So overall, see, again, like, my answer here is not to say that everything has been done, or it's just that, yeah,
I get that.
Is that, it's been positive so far. Yeah,
I get that. That's fantastic. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more, and I think a lot of questions will come up about, how does one initiate this journey in one's organization? What does that phase one look like? And what are the various components of it, if as it were? And how to take one's journey of LGBTQ inclusion to the next level, if assuming many organizations out there have recently embarked on that journey. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll respond to questions as well. But Chandra, I want to come back to you and ask you, what are the behaviors and mindsets of an ideal ally? That's one part of the question. I have one more, if you don't mind, and if you could kind of, in my journey, I have been asked by so many people, Amita, sexual orientation is such a personal matter. Why do we need to address it in the organization? They can understand gender inclusion. They seem to understand persons with disability inclusion. And well, I hope they also understand broadly that inclusive behavior doesn't only mean minority groups. We can actually, within this, even interactions within the majority group, sometimes we don't know how to include people, and we make them feel left out. So that's another, completely different conversation, so to speak. But my question to you, one, how would you respond to someone when they say, why do we need to address this in our organization? And two, what does ideal allyship behavior look like?
There's been a lot of research that's been done, at least in the West, in terms of the business benefits of LGBT inclusion. Number one, Boston Consulting put out a report in 2020 saying that at the end of the decade, 70% of our workforce comprise of Gen Zs and millennials. Gen Zs and millennials consider diversity and inclusion as a key criteria when they select a brand, whether they want to buy a brand or whether they want to work for a brand. But then it didn't stop there. They even went and asked people, and they found out 65% of those millennials and Gen Zs have said, I would look at diversity and inclusion as a reason, as a key criteria when selecting a brand. That's exactly what I did. When the organization rolled me an offer letter, I said, it's okay. I said, can I look at your employee handbook? Can I look at the policies? Those were questions, pointed questions that I asked at my organization. They readily shared those with me. But then it's beyond policies as well. It is definitely beyond policies. I always call these allies, right? I call them as rainbows of LGBT people. I compare them to bees that play a very vital role in pollination and making the organizational culture rich and inclusive. Allies not only help you sustain an inclusive culture, but also increase the safe space in the organization. See, allyship is a lifelong journey. I look at my parents as allies. I look at a lot of my friends and colleagues who've accepted me as their allies. Were they able to come around on the first day and say, yes, I'm going to be your ally? Absolutely not. When I speak to organizations, when I speak to the leadership team, I show them the business benefits. Many times people look at LGBT people as only potential talent. They fail to understand that LGBT people could be a part of your consumer base. They could be a part of your supplier network. They could be a part of your client base, your customer network, so on and so forth. So you get connections with new buying centers if you're an inclusive organization. They've also found out LGBT inclusive organizations have reported 31% more sales than organizations that are not. So they're connecting with new buying centers. They're probably much more inclusive in selling their products to a larger community. Not just that, look at me for an example, right? I was able to come into GE, I was able to do my day job, and then I have a day job as a co-lead for the Pride pillar. So my productivity is twice. So organizations have reported 37% in jump in productivity when they were able to welcome people as is. Not just that, even you go to the stock market, right? There's something called the Credit Suisse LGBT 270 index. They tag organizations. It's an index comprising of organizations, 270 organizations that are LGBT inclusive. It's found, research has found that those organizations that are LGBT inclusive trade much higher in the stock market than organizations that are not.
Very, very well put. Also the mental health, angle of all of this also comes into play. You've established very well the business case for addressing LGBTQ inclusion. What do you think allyship? What does great allyship look like?
At GE, at least I can give you an example. What we do is we onboard every employee. The moment we onboard, I also give them an opportunity to say, you can become an ally. Sign up to be an ally. So people sign up to be an ally. And we onboard allies. We tell them there's a lot more information. We give allies how to intervene. We do role play. If you're in a situation like this, how would you act? So we train people to be much more empathetic, to be able to be vocal and visible.
So Chandra, give us an example right now. If you and I were working in the same organization, and if you were to confide in me and say that you identify as a queer person, what should my reaction be? Because many people in my situation don't know what the reaction should be.
See, not being from the LGBT community, right? I would first look for markers to see if this person is even an ally for me to come out.
No, assuming that I show sensitivity and empathy in the rest of my world, I know that it should probably, if I am sensitive and empathetic, my response to you or someone coming out is likely to be a good response, but no, there's no guarantee. So because many people in my shoes would be confused, is the right response one of curiosity? Is it of saying, oh, I didn't know, tell me more? Or should it be, well, thank you for sharing this with me, but it changes nothing for us? What type of reaction should it be?
It is probably a little bit of all three. I would first go with the first one, the last one that you shared. Yeah. Thank you for sharing this with me. It changes nothing between us. would be the first sentence that I would look for.
Right. Okay.
Second, I don't want people to say, oh, you're like someone. You may know somebody from the community. So are you like that? Oh, I had no clue. I mean, I've heard all this, right? I've heard no, I saw no clue that you could be somebody from the
Or no
community.
signs that you were, as if they were to be, as if there are signs of, yeah.
No, because many a times people tend to stereotype. They all carry biases and they probably think this is how an LGBT person looks, and they look for all those markers. And if I don't show any of those markers, I've been masquerading my markers so well that I blend in, because that's exactly what corporate world teaches you, right? They want you to blend in. They don't want you to stick out like a sore thumb. So it takes, I mean, so coming back to the topic of allyships, right? Allyship is also a spectrum. On the extreme left, you have people who are negative allies, or probably I call them as negative bystanders. They probably use discriminatory words. They probably have extreme views on LGBT community. It could be homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, so on and so forth. But then when you keep educating them, and when you help them with a paradigm shift, they probably become neutral. You can neutralize them, and they probably become passive bystanders. They may not become active. And then through a lot more knowledge sharing, life experience sharing, when one of their friends or family members come out, then they start to say, okay, what more can I do? And this person, it doesn't change anything between us, right? And then they start to become active and vocal allies. And this doesn't happen overnight. This takes a lot of time. I've seen with my own parents. The first thing that they did as a knee-jerk reaction is, oh, we need to go see a psychiatrist, something's wrong with you. After the psychiatrist said nothing is wrong with you, okay, let's go to an astrologer. I think we may have a cure there for you. So these are knee-jerk reactions.
Sure. Chandra, I'll come back to you, time permitting, and I'm sure lots of questions will come your way as well. Prerna, anything you'd like to add? Chandra has talked about what allyship should look like. In your journey, how would you have wanted someone to respond to your situation?
Yeah, definitely. So it has been, covered by talking about empathetic attitude, because sensitivity and empathetic attitude would, of course, make a lot of difference and make a safer space for any LGBTQ plus community members. Otherwise, it is so difficult to, face such kind of attitudes and biases. So what I understand.
Did you lose out, Prerna, did you lose out on any opportunities, or did people kept a distance from you after you came out as trans? What exactly did that look like?
Exactly. I'll tell you my, one of my experiences when my, previous employer, when the organization got shut down and when I had no work, and I was before that I had become very familiar with many corporates doing discussions on gender and development, and before joining Mphasis, so with that work I had established good familiarity with those corporates. But when I lost my job and reached out to them, I could really sense Hippocratic attitude. What we talk about inclusion, what we talk about diversity, for some it is only on paper, for some it is only the talk, and for some it is only the tick in the box activity. But when there is a real time for inclusion, I really experience a distancing. I could experience that silos, that with my understanding about the community, and with my potential, if I couldn't find the space where I have already discussed about all this, and what to understand as a trans person, on this planet. So it's not so easy, Amita, what I'm talking about.
So Prerna, sorry to get a little granular here, but is it not appropriate for someone to ask you, when did you start realizing that you were, identify with the another gender, or if they asked you, and we're this conversation, if you don't mind, I'm having very deliberately to help our audience today to understand what interactions should be had, what are some of the do's and don'ts, and what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. A little bit, if you could just touch on it
Of
a
course.
very little.
Yeah. See, what is appropriate is to not to invade a personal space of the person where the person is not comfortable to talk about, especially about surgery, especially about the cost, especially about the medication, especially about the the location. But of course, if a very open question asked with the consent of the person to understand how the time that you realize that you're not aligning to your gender and you are different among the rest of the others, I think there is a very good environment wherein you can respond to that question, and there is no, of course, harm to respond to those questions. Such kind of positive questions of coming out experiences, or family with you, or what was the time you realized how your experience has been school. I mean, such kind of questions, of course, not incorrect to ask, and it is very much in the capacity of anybody from the community to respond to those. But barring those personal questions, why surgeries and for what surgeries, what if there is no surgeries, these are very, very difficult to respond to.
Got it. Excellent. Awesome. We'll talk more about this. I want to get Ramprasad's views on, Ramprasad, now, of course, many organizations are starting to embark on this journey of LGBTQ inclusion, but there are hundreds and thousands out there who still haven't started on this journey. Any thoughts on what might be holding them back? Is it because the leadership themselves is not sure of how to go about it? Or you think the leadership is still confused as to whether or not this should be a part of the efforts?
Yeah, I think, it's a good question. I'll answer this in two parts. One, because of the great resignation, all our companies have like at least 40% new people in the last 2 years, right? There has been so much of merry-go-round, and it is still happening that, at any point of time, you have a good section of population which has never even come to the office, which doesn't have that common culture, fabric, and everything which we hold together. And this was apparent to me last year when I was holding, I was moderating a panel for Rainbow Film Festival, we called it. It was a series of short rainbow movies, and I was also hosting a rainbow couple, right? And so Publicis Sapient is a digital transformation partner. We do like really, really cutting edge work. And I would think that I would have always thought that, the kind of people who are with me, my colleagues, are not, say, homophobic or, all of those things, right? But at least one person, and there were like 700 people, 800 people on the chat, at least one person, like, the kind of comments he was posting was like, I couldn't believe that this is my colleague, right? So I think there is overall sensitization and overall change in attitude which is needed, not just at a company level, country level, world level, whatever you can say, before you see the transformation happening across. And the second thing which you spoke about is relating to the business case. I see someone has put a question on that as well, Shiv Kumar. And see, like few years back, again, this is in London, one very world-renowned beauty company, we were working with them. And, I happened to be in that room, and there were like, 3 of my colleagues who happened to be women in that room. And this beauty company, it's like a very, very famous global brand. They also were working with another company, and there were like, a few people from that company as well in that room. when the client suddenly stopped us and said, like, hey, like, Sapient, like, I see that you got like 3 women in the room, and this is like, beauty brand oriented towards women. But the other company, which is a famous consulting company, they said, like, and you are all men. How do you think you will understand, what this beauty brand stands for with women and all of that, right? So the empathy itself is missing. I see a similar narrative unfolding now, in terms of the business case, right? Like, so Chandra talked about that 270 companies and them doing well. The way I think of it from a business perspective, it is not because that those 270 companies think of, inclusion is why they are ahead. Okay, that's not the case, right? Like, let's make it clear. Those companies are good at everything, right? They are good at being inclusive. They're good at being inclusive towards LGBTQ plus. They're good at being inclusive for women. They're inclusive for, aged people. They're inclusive for people with disabilities. They're generally inclusive. They're generally progressive. And as a result, they have much more diverse ideas which are floating around in the company. They kind of think of, new products with a lot more empathy. And as such, they are leaders, right? It's not the other way around. Like, it's not because, they are caring for one particular section or that they're leaders. They are leaders because they are generally inclusive in all of their thought processes in terms of how they even think of, product development. And I think that is the biggest business case which can be there as companies, start becoming more inclusive, right? This is a transformation we have seen with, play out with others, marginalized communities. And, I hope, that this is the path, we will go, right? So.
Thanks for that. I agree with you completely. Chandra, you wanted to add something to this conversation? What might be holding some organizations back? What is the hesitancy around it? Is it entirely cultural and societal influences which are hard to overcome?
Great question, Amita. A lot of Indian organizations are not LGBT inclusive. Like, that's the reality. A lot of MNCs that we call, right, multinational corporations are the ones who are
leading
they're leading the way. But then Indian organizations, a lot of them still probably aren't aware that homosexuality has been decriminalized in the country. Number one, a lot of them. You know what? That was one of the primary verdicts given out by the bench comprising of 5 judges. They said it is the role of the government to go and create that sensitization and awareness in the larger society. And it's been 4 years since the verdict was given, and nothing has happened, nothing has changed. Unfortunately, the pandemic happened, it slowed down everything, it's only created more challenges for the LGBT community, but it's not given anything fruitful for us. But then a lot of people also think it is a different generation that is probably in the CXO or the leadership team, and they don't even understand what the next generation wants. And, and a lot of people probably think that homosexuality is so alien to Indian culture. Until 2018, homosexuality was considered a disorder by the Indian Medical Association. In 1973, the American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association said it is not a disorder. Look at the lag, 45 years we've lost. Last year, one of the judges also made a comment in Kerala as well as in Tamil Nadu, saying that, a lot of these medical textbooks needs to be rewritten. Look at the treatment meted out to trans people when they step into hospitals. It is the medical community that is not sensitized, that is not aware that this is not a disorder. So there's a lot more education that needs to be done, a lot more awareness. I tell my LGBT community people, even if each of you, they say 7 to 10% of any community comprise of LGBT people. I tell them, even if all 7 to 10% of us become vocal and visible about our rights and we become activists, right? It is still not enough for us to cure homophobia, transphobia, biphobia in the society.
I agree, absolutely. So this has been very useful. I love one of the questions that is that I'm going to pose here. How much does privilege actually allow one to be an ally? I think this is a very deep and profound question. And I think all of you will have some personal thoughts around this, maybe from your personal experience. So do you think privilege comes in the way of allyship? Anyone, Chandra, Prerna?
We should ask Ram to speak because he is an ally.
Yeah,
no, I'm right now in London, and I was talking to and so we are here on a vacation now, and you see, like, societies over a period of time, as they've grown richer, have they become more cultural, right? So this is at a societal level, right? So the same question what you're asking is at an individual level, because privilege gives you that space to think and ask, like, hey, is this right thing being done, right? And that's where the way I would rephrase the question, Amita, is leadership has that privilege, right? Leadership across companies have that privilege because they are the ones who kind of are thinking about decisions, policies, and all of that. And my question would be the other way around, like, hey, now that you have the privilege, right, it's time to invoke the famous Spider-Man dialogue saying, with great powers come great responsibilities. So as with as a leader in your company, what are you trying to do to make it more inclusive, right? Because it's a no-brainer, right? Like, privilege is what gives you that space, right? Like, a person who is battling for his daily bread is not going to be thinking of hey, how do I make the payments better for wheelchair to go in a much smoother way? Like, absolutely not, right? But if you are a person who is like running the city, then it is your job to make sure that the payments are done so that people with disability are able to walk or travel better, right? So with privileges is where, like, you need to ask yourself that question and make it more inclusive.
And actually, not just the kinds of privilege that people conventionally think of, but even privilege as it cisgender, which means identifying with the gender that you're born with, is a huge privilege. And the impact that cisgender people can make when they become champions, like Chandra rightly said, even if their entire 7 to 10% of the LGBTQ community were to come together and raise their voice, it probably won't have as much of an impact as cisgender people speaking up for LGBTQ inclusion. Am I right?
Yeah.
Right. So let me quickly let the audience know that please let your questions start coming in. Harini, have you identified anything that we could be at this point asking the panelists? Although I have a ton of my own follow-up questions for them, but I really want to take some of the audience questions if we have them. Sorry?
Yes, Ram?
No, I didn't.
No, I was just...
Yeah, go ahead, Ram. Go ahead. You're saying something?
No, I was just like, as questions come in, I wanted to add one more point. Like, you talked about privilege and everything. There is, if you go to Publicis Sapient offices now, and this is a change which has just happened in the last 1 year, we have gender neutral toilets. Okay. It's a huge change for us to just like go from having just toilet facilities and restroom facilities for just men or women to saying we'll have another one which will be gender neutral, label it appropriately and all of that, right? It's been a huge change, and as we go in this hybrid work model and evolve in this model, and people come into office, they see this as a welcome change. We've got comments, because I'm on the council, I hear from Vishaka and so many others as to, hey, this is the reaction which we're getting and all of that, right? It's like amazing. But again, like, I was trying to, go back to the question, like, this is the privilege, we have, like, as a, whatever, a large corporation to say that, we will make space for gender neutral toilets, right? Like, there are still, parts of the country where, even like luxury of toilet itself is a big thing, right? So that's where, like, the privilege part of it is, really a central thing. And that's where, like, my point would be to think of, how leaders use that privilege to be, more inclusive. So.
Sure. Thank you so much for that. Harini, whenever a question comes in, please jump in and don't hesitate to let us know. Meanwhile, Chandra, here's an interesting situation that I would like you to respond to. What are the various ways in which we can create sensitization, which is not a programmatic approach, which is not a training program or a sensitization program? I mean, programs have their place, don't get me wrong. I think programs introduce a theme and shed light on it. And if it's well done, it can be thought-provoking. But in organizations, can you tell us what the journey could look like, so that people can, in their minds, they've broken it down and they're not hesitant to embark on that journey?
Fantastic question, Amita. So what I could immediately think of, there's so many things that we could do. For example, we have ID cards. Every organization issues ID card. Some organizations go one step further and probably say, what is your blood group? Along with blood group, why don't you also mention the person's pronouns? That is so easy. You don't need to go to a class to actually pick your pronouns. You can get organizations to ask people what your pronouns are and put them on the ID card. That's a very easy step and a no-brainer. Number two, trying to avoid, heterosexual or heteronormative conversations, trying to put an end to it. For example, so many times on the lunch table, my colleagues were trying to matchmake for me without even understanding that, Indians are so good at it, right? You see somebody single, you have to matchmake them. And they're like, oh, I have a friend, and that's how conversations start. My bosses have even said that to me, honestly. And some of the women in the offices have also approached me like, oh, can we go out on a date and stuff like that. So, let's try and consciously avoid those conversations. Yeah, I mean, we only have heteronormative conversations in our workplace. Many a times we only talk about children. We either talk about husband or wife. But then sadly, recently at one of the organizations I was pitching for LGBT inclusion, the recruiter, head of recruitment came up to me and said, is it okay if I ask you this question? You said you had a partner. So who's the man in the relationship? And I'm like, this is exactly what is not there in an LGBT world. I said, in a heterosexual world, you have these genders, you create these roles and responsibilities. Whereas when it comes to LGBT, right, we don't think of genders. We only look at, okay, do you have time? Do you have the skill to do this? So let's look at it as a piece of work. Who is good at doing it? Can I help you in some way? So that's how we look at it, and we don't make it as somebody's responsibility.
Yes. I saw, I'll come to Prerna. Yes, the floor is yours in just a minute. I saw a fabulous interview on YouTube of a Hollywood actress where she said that she proposed, and she identified as a lesbian. She said that she proposed to her partner, and but the interviewer actually asked, I mean, what made you think that you should be proposing versus being proposed to? Anyway, so you're right. I mean, it takes a shift in the mindset to stop thinking of very, male gendered roles of a male gender roles, and then trying to fit those into all equations. Agreed. Prerna, floor is yours. Please do.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Chandra said. Lovely idea to have the iCards, and then we have the, pronouns for the understanding of others. We also have similar practices, which is not again a programmatic approach to, create this sensitizations and awareness among the larger audience in the organization. An example, same gender partner medical insurance that we have at the organization has really been, a kind gesture towards creating this space of inclusion for the rest of the others. Another example, we also have gender neutral washrooms across the facilities. Again, this particular, infrastructural change that is being done is also allowing the members from the community to secure this place of, safer space at the organization. Alongside, an example of, you have manuals, you have official documents, and ensuring that all these documents have inclusive language. As simple as the, job description when it is out also talks about equal opportunity organizations, and that has inclusive language. I think such kind of small, practices, if inculcated the way it is happening at the organization with Mphasis, I think it offers and opens the door of opportunity and hope for many of my community members to, explore.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Appreciate that very much.
Yes. Amita ma'am,
yeah.
so we have Parul pitching in with an idea telling LGBT stories can be a part of the weekly quizzes and theaters, just to make it a part of the casual platform. So that is one great idea. And we have another question by Shiv Kumar. He asks, is there a different approach one needs to keep in mind when beginning the LGBTQ inclusion journey in traditional sectors? So he gives an example of the manufacturing sector because it's a very different ball game there. So the question is open to the panel, ma'am.
Yeah. Chandra, you'd like to take that?
Yeah, GE has got a lot of manufacturing presence, and the first year of the journey, we focused on people in our research centers because it's much easier to reach out to them to get this conversation going. But last year we said, okay, now how can we take this beyond our offices into our plants? And then we said, okay, we need to narrate this entire conversation into a story. Let's try and see if we can use theater. Let's try and see if we can bring in a trans person to actually narrate their experiences. Let's try and make it in their own language. Let's try and use their own medium through which they understand. Because a lot of these people may not have finished, they may not have double masters, and they may not have all this information. So we said, let's just draw that representation that we see in the society. A couple of weeks ago, a month and a half ago, we have a facility just outside of Nagasandra, so in Bangalore. So you'll have to, when you cross the Gorgunte-Palya traffic light, you always see a bunch of trans people. Similarly, at the Nagasandra toll gate, you also see a bunch of trans people. So when I was pitching trans inclusion at the workplace, I asked them this question pointedly. So who do you see every morning? Some of them were able to say, yes, we see. I mean, so they came up with a lot of answers. One of them actually said, we see trans people. I said, you're leaving all of those people behind at traffic lights and at toll booths. I said, when is it that we can all bring them to workplace? And it takes a lot of, when you invite them to your premises, when people find out, see, a lot of these phobias, fears, aversion is because of misinformation. It's because of myth. When somebody doesn't look like us, we always think there's something wrong with us. So when you get them much closer to these people, give opportunities to interact, and that is where real change happens. And we've been able to do that in our own little capacity. And there's a lot more to be done. But at least those conversations have started at the workplace. How can we have trans inclusion?
Fantastic. I have a follow-up question for all three of you. What role can and does social media play in creating awareness and sensitization in this space? And do organizations encourage people's personal views on social media? Ram, that you should be able to tell us as well. But the first aspect, what is the role social media has played and should play?
Okay, so I think the media's importance, not just social media, right? All forms of media, like, even the conventional ones, have a huge affirmative role to play. But one thing, I think we shouldn't forget, and Chandra brought it up earlier, is the role of the government. Okay, in India, like, unfortunately, because of pandemic and because of so many other priorities, maybe whatever, the government has not acted. And when I say government, it's not just one government, right? There is a central, state, district, and so many levels of government in India. What is the role the government plays in this is huge thing, right? Because unfortunately, a lot of India is like, and all of us on this call ourselves are, we live in this middle class bubble, right? For example, we live in societies where the government might not be able to give you electricity 24/7, but, the society itself has, power generator, which, steps in, and, the life is comfortable, right? We never even know when the power goes off. I think, but when it comes to inclusion and when it comes to the role, the most important role, it cannot be the private sector leading the way, right? It cannot be like, the manufacturing example, again, the question which came up earlier. Yes, everything which we would do from a private sector and all of that would be greatly helpful, but it is, government which has to kind of play a front role in this, to bring about a change, right?
But
And
Ram,
then like
sorry to interrupt you, Ram, but if the government is not doing its bit, then are we just going to sit back and say, oh, but they were meant to, and they are failing us? Then are we not failing our friends,
no,
colleagues?
yeah, see, absolutely, right? See, the protests and everything which happens for every other demand and rights has to happen in this space as well. And that's why, like, the example of Humsafar Trust, which I brought up earlier, they do a lot of pioneering work in terms of policy in this space, right? Figure out how do we help, policy formulation, and ally with organizations like Humsafar is one way of bringing about the change. Because again, government is not just one person, right? There are like multiple people at multiple level, and the changes have to be brought out, like, at all those levels. Like, take this example of gender neutral toilets, which we spoke about. A lot of the Western world, gender neutral toilets are there in schools now. Okay, which means that, and when I say school, it's like even like, middle schools and, whatever, right? So like 5th standard, 6th standard grade schools, which means that, there is an awareness, there is an intention, and there is an action, right? We need all three. You need to have that awareness both at the children level, the school authorities level. Then there should be an intention to do something about it, and then of course have the resources to act on it. And that's where I think, while there is a role we all play, but we should also figure out how do we hold our governments accountable to be much more inclusive towards everyone, right? Like,
Yeah. Prerna, do you want to add something? There's a yeah, please do. Please go ahead.
I wanted to add to Ram, because I have my personal experience of doing the advocacy, with the state government also, and with the central government also. And there is very little that can be expected, from the government, because by the time you sensitize them, by the time you make them understand, by the time they understand thoroughly what are all this, what is this community, it's the time for them to change. And then another government comes up and another influencer comes up. So instead, if the other way around, as Humsafar does a great deal of work in this particular field, likewise, social media plays a very, very active and positive role in communicating with them about the talent that is existing on the planet, and also has business returns out of those talent. So social media in today's time, whether it is LinkedIn, it is Insta, or it is any kind of electronic media, because once the success stories are put out, or once, because nowadays everybody has the access to such social handles on their palm. And if such kind of stories, or if such kind of messages are passed on, I mean, in a way, we are also trying to combat such kind of perceptions that influences and decision makers have. And all those who are in connections, in touch with the social handles, are all the decision makers, CEO, or the managers, this particular community that really is very, very critical for, people like us from the community. So I think social media plays a very, very critical role in the lives of LGBTQ plus community to create this awareness, among the larger audience or among the masses in the society.
I would imagine so. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. There's a question, Ram, for you, which says, trans people are mocked in the movies. Is there a way to stop this and sensitize them? Because movies have a great impact on people. Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, there is this series called as Mad Men. It's a 7-season running Emmy Award-winning series. It talks about advertising industry and how it evolved in the New York in the 60s and 70s. And the series is beautiful, and the reason it won multiple Emmys is because it not just showed the ad industry, but showed the society change in that time, right? For example, in the initial first season, women who are part of that season are only secretaries, and they are mocked at, and they are considered as sexual objects and everything. But by the time season 3 comes, you see actually women playing an important role as industry ad executives and all of it, right? Like similarly, there is one season where a family goes out on a picnic, and this is again in a very posh Manhattan suburb, and they spread out a mat on the grass and they eat a lot of stuff. And once they are done, they just throw the chips and all the wrappers everywhere and just leave. Okay, but same thing, you would go to New York, say Central Park today, you would see that families are collecting after themselves, they are collecting after the dog and all of that. So there has been a societal change, and that's why I was replying to Sriram, saying that hopefully as we become more privileged and as we become much more aware and educated around this, such behavior changes, because it's nothing but extremely immature behavior, right? Like that's what it is. But for that, it has to be a societal change which has to happen.
Yep. Go ahead, Prerna.
Yes, again, I would add from some experience here how one trans person was restricted here in one of the malls in Pune, and it created a good amount of noise here. But I would say the role of bystanders and the role of allies would of course contribute to a greater extent to create this culture of acceptance wherever it is, whether it is a market area or it is the mall or it is the PVR. Because if I am seeing something inappropriate, I can at least correct, I can at least go out of my way to address, and I can stop that. And if each member in the society assumes the role for bystanders or not just a spectator and just makes the mockery, but of course contributes to address there and then, I think there is a possibility of creating this environment of acceptance.
Agreed. Thank you so much. We have very little time left. I'm going to first ask Harini. Harini, do we have any questions or comments that you'd like to call out right now to the panel?
Not any questions, Amita. I guess we're all done with the questions.
Okay. So for closing the session, each of you, very briefly, what are the top 2 things that you would suggest an organization do to embark on the journey of LGBTQ inclusion? Top 2 things, very concretely. This is in the form of a recommendation.
Okay, if I can go first.
Yes.
I would clearly say the need of the hour is trans inclusion. Organizations can start looking at how can we reskill them? How can we upskill them? How can we, because skilling is not a problem for many of the organizations. All of them have their own learning material. They have their mini universities. So that can be put to great use. You don't have to wait the government to come and say that to you. You can get ahead of the government and you can skill trans people, give them internship opportunities so that they can experience your culture. You can understand their world and the difficulties that they go through.
Awesome. Okay,
That
that's
is
one.
that is
one.
one.
Yes.
Second one, use your CSR funds. A lot of organizations have corporate social responsibility funds. Try and see how you can use this. Work closely with NGOs that work with in the space of LGBT inclusion to either raise awareness amongst a particular community, or probably how can I use this to actually skill them. So there's so many things that you can do with those two.
Awesome. Chandra, you went off audio.
No, those are the two. I'm limiting myself to two so that other people can share as well.
Yes. Thank you, Chandra, for that. Prerna, which are the top two things that you suggest organizations can quickly do in a very concrete way to embark on this journey?
One thing is for sure, create opportunities. As managers, as organization, if we are able to create those opportunities, so creation of opportunities is one. On the other hand, inclusive hiring is another thing. Getting in touch with civil society organizations, very proactive NGOs working in the field of LGBTQ plus empowerment and betterment, or any recruiting agency, having a strong connection with such stakeholders to get such talent and pool of resources, and trying to, through affirmative action, trying to get them on board. So I think create opportunities, at the same time, practice of inclusive hiring would of course make a lot of difference to, have these members at the organization in professional capacity.
Fantastic.
And,
Completely
and I
agree.
would and I would of course urge to this audience that Mphasis has a greater place and safer place to welcome the community members. Anyone who is interested must consider this place of workplace, to as your, to realize your aspirations at this place.
Right. By the way, kudos to Mphasis. I remember years ago when I was with Deloitte, US offices in India, we invited a very senior leader from Mphasis because you had a very progressive persons with disability promotion and program. And now I'm hearing about LGBTQ. It's fantastic. Kudos to you. Ram, top two things an organization can do easily to embark on this journey?
No, I think the answer is again two-piece, process and people, and let me elaborate both. I think organizations are at different levels of maturity when it comes to process. We spoke about pronouns earlier, right? Of having, ability to choose pronouns and put them on the ID cards and everything. What I found surprising some time back was Oracle doesn't have, more than male or female as fields, right? So you can't even roll out an offer when, you don't have that. So there are certain basic things to be fixed at a process level. And of course, once you get past that, like, how do you have better insurance practices? How do you have much more, like all of that has to be relooked, right? So process and people, again, like, what I find is that sometimes we have to go one step further. So, for example, one of the first transgender, persons we hired through a special campaign, I asked my panelists, like, hey, tell me reason, why we should select the person and not give me 10 reasons why we should not select this person. We hired like 3 or 4 people as interns who could not speak English, right? But we still went ahead and hired those people. And then what we are now doing is, actually having English, speaking communication classes as part of the training and as part of the internship. And our hope is that, end of the 6 months and then, whatever 8-9 months it takes, we are actually able to absorb them in the workforce, okay, and, enable them to be like, successful in the company, right? It's just not like, doing a checkbox hiring, but actually when it goes to people, make sure that you're enabling people, to be successful. So that's the second point in terms of think of, how can you be more inclusive in terms of hiring and go one step extra maybe in trying to make that happen.
Fantastic, fantastic. There is one question that has come up here, and if I may quickly respond to that, it says with respect to recruitment, while hiring a diversity talent, how do we identify the candidate? So my response to that is, there are two pieces to this whole conversation. One is gender identity, the other is sexual orientation. You cannot hire by going out looking for different types of sexual orientation. It's too personal. You cannot ask those questions, and one doesn't need to ask those questions. What do we need to do instead? Not look to hire those people, because we already have tons of those people in our organizations, and they're closeted. We don't know that they identify. So we have to create an inclusive environment, enabling them to come out of the closet. That is for orientation. For hiring, gender identity is a big one, and we can proactively hire trans people and people with who or even those who have what is the term I'm looking for, Chandra? Binary, non-binary individuals. That can be proactively. Chandra and Prerna, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you are right.
It's correct.
Correct. Okay, great. So that was a response to you, Shweta, who posed the question. Thank you for posing this question, because it provides a lot of clarity to a lot of people. And I'm going to turn the platform back to Harini and Rashmi and Janani for organizing this for us, and your closing comments, and my personal thanks for such an enriching conversation to Chandra, Prerna, and Ramprasad. Thank you so much. Harini, over to you.
Thank you, Amita, ma'am. So we have one anonymous question left. So it says, what can an organization do if an employee is going through gender affirmation surgery? Is there anything an organization can do for them?
Yeah, Prerna,
yeah. Organization can provide medical support. It can be gender reassignment surgery cost if that can be reimbursed, or it can be covered through policy. Organization can also provide gender reassignment leaves that Mphasis provides, because we have this leave option, adoption and gender reassignment leaves of a month. So gender assignment leave option can be given to the candidate who is in this process of transformation, or gender reassignment surgery cost could also be covered under the medical insurance. Along with that, I think support system would play a major role.
Yes, thank you so much for that. So thank you, dear panelists, and thank you, Amita ma'am. It was a lovely session, and I myself have become a more sensitive individual after the session itself. So I guess the audience enjoyed it. It is one of the most populous chat window we've ever seen in a lot of panel discussions. Thank you so much for that. So just to note, we have another open dialogue session coming up tomorrow. It is on the topic of mental health challenges in the queer community. We'll be speaking with Dr. Gautam Das Udupi, who is a leading neuropsychiatrist. So stay tuned to that session. It is free, of course, virtual, and it's from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. on Friday, the 24th, tomorrow. So mark the date, audience, and we would love to have you there again. Thank you so much, panelists. Have a great day, people. We're more sensitive individuals now. This is Harini signing off. Good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.